So if the data says, and it does, that white folks on average have 15 times the net worth of black folks, 13 times the net worth of Latino folk, right? We just assume, well, we must have worked harder. Is that right? That's interesting, because actually the black folks and brown folks have done some of the hardest work in this country ever since the country was founded. Were it not for the labor of African descended peoples, there would be no country at all. In fact, it was my family, white slave-owning family in the South, that got black folks to do all the hard work because we were lazy asses and didn't want to work at all. White folks in the South on the plantation used to want to sit on the porch and drink mint juleps and have carriage rides rather than work, while black folks did all the real labor. And yet we decided that black folks are lazy, which I find fascinating. Right? And then people write to me and say, well, these black people, they're just taking all the jobs. Okay, which is it, precious? Because it can't be both. People of color can't take all the jobs and be lazy. I don't ask much of racists because I expect very little. But you cannot be lazy and take all the jobs. Are we at least clear on that? Like, if you took all the jobs, you were like the opposite of lazy. If you are indeed lazy, you probably did not even take one job, let alone all of them. So I just need racists to get their damn story straight. That's all I ask. I just don't like moving targets. That's all, right? But if I don't tell my daughter the truth, she defaults to the position of the culture, and then she can't understand what the problem is. The same is true with policing. You can't understand the Black Lives Matter movement and the importance of it if you don't know the history and the relationship between law enforcement and black and brown peoples. If you understood that history, you wouldn't ask one question about why this movement is necessary and why it's righteous. If you knew that history, but you don't know it, and it's not your fault. You weren't supposed to know it, and nobody taught it to you, right? So you don't have to know that modern policing traces back to slave patrols. That black folks' first experience with law enforcement was having, you know who? Working class and poor white folks on horseback going around keeping black folks in line on behalf of the rich master that owned all the property. That sounds a lot like modern policing, because ain't no rich people policing, right? It's working class folks who are out there protecting the property of rich people against the depredations of poor people. That's what modern policing is, and it traces back. And we know that's what modern policing is, by the way, because we will lock you up for 10 years for $100 worth of food stamp fraud. But if you take $12.5 trillion on Wall Street, 20% of the net worth of this country, you will not do 1 day in jail. So we know that law enforcement has got nothing to do with enforcing the law. It's got nothing to do with good people and bad people, lawbreakers and the law abiding. It only has to do with controlling certain people. And black and brown folks know who those certain people usually are, because it's always been them. See, black folks know that it was cops who were involved in race riots and racial terrorism against black communities for the first 50 years of the 20th century. You didn't learn about that in class either, and that's not your fault. It wasn't taught.
Hello, my good people. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for sparing your time to pass by here to check on what we have for you today. I hope you're doing good, you and your families. And today we have a very interesting video here to talk about. I'll start by saying I have immense and huge respect for white people that come out bravely to speak the truth, to speak truth to power, to tell the world what really happened, what really got us where we are today, what white people did to black people historically, the oppression that black people have suffered because of the greed of white people, white supremacists. And, just put history clear where it's supposed to be. You see, I often say this. There are a lot of things that need to be done to reverse the situation of the oppression of black people by white supremacy. Amongst them, we have reparations, to pay reparations, and sensible apologies. But above and beyond all, what I really believe in, that what we need to do right now, because historically, white supremacy oppressed and suppressed our ancestors, our grandparents, great-grandparents, and grandparents, our parents. And even as of today, white supremacy still continues to dominate in the world. What I believe should be done to settle this course, to reverse the situation, is before we talk about the reparations, before we talk about the apologies, the white people of today, because my ancestors are not here today as a black person, maybe our parents, our grandparents, and our great grandparents are not here today, those of black people and even those of white people. So, we that are there today, what do we do? The white people of today must stop, must not do to black people what their ancestors were doing to the ancestors of black people. That is the first step at it. Here is a very interesting video by Tim Wise, this lawyer. Let's watch this video together. Let's learn. It's a very, very educative video. Let's learn together and let's say something at the end of it. So let's jump right in.
Human beings are social creatures by definition. We've never lived in isolation from one another. We've always lived in families and tribes and communities, nations, right? If you ever meet someone who's actually a rugged individual and hasn't been raised in a social context, you need to get the hell away from that person. They would be like a feral animal, right? They would be wild. It'd be like being raised on an island by a porpoise. They wouldn't even know how to have language. They'd probably try to eat you because they wouldn't understand there's like a taboo against that, right? You need to get the hell away from anybody who's actually a rugged individual because there are no such thing. And certainly, let me just say this, if you inherited $200 million from your daddy's real estate empire, you sure as hell are not a self-made anything or a rugged individual. You might want to write that shit down. So there is no rugged individual anything. We're all social beings. Some have had opportunity, others have not. Unless we're honest about that, unless we're willing to have a conversation, we end up misleading ourselves and we can't understand what we're seeing. And then if we can't understand it, we're not going to fix it, right? We're not going to fix the disparity in housing if we don't understand where it came from. So if the data says, and it does, that white folks on average have 15 times the net worth of black folks, 13 times the net worth of Latino folk, right? We just assume, well, we must have worked harder. Is that right? That's interesting because actually black folks and brown folks have done some of the hardest work in this country ever since the country was founded. Were it not for the labor of African descended peoples, there would be no country at all. In fact, it was my family, white slave-owning family in the South that got black folks to do all the hard work because we were lazy asses and didn't want to work at all. White folks in the South on the plantation used to want to sit on the porch and drink mint juleps and have carriage rides rather than work, while black folks did all the real labor. And yet we decided that black folks are lazy, which I find fascinating. Right? And then people write to me and say, well, these black people, they're just taking all the jobs. Okay, which is it, precious? Because it can't be both. People of color can't take all the jobs and be lazy. I don't ask much of racists because I expect very little. But you cannot be lazy and take all the jobs. Are we at least clear on that? Like if you took all the jobs, you were like the opposite of lazy. If you are indeed lazy, you probably did not even take one job, let alone all of them. So I just need racists to get their damn story straight. That's all I ask. I just don't like moving targets. That's all, right? But if I don't tell my daughter the truth, she defaults to the position of the culture, and then she can't understand what the problem is. The same is true with policing. You can't understand the Black Lives Matter movement and the importance of it if you don't know the history and the relationship between law enforcement and black and brown peoples. If you understood that history, you wouldn't ask one question about why this movement is necessary and why it's righteous. If you knew that history, but you don't know it and it's not your fault. You weren't supposed to know it and nobody taught it to you, right? So you don't have to know that modern policing traces back to slave patrols. That black folks' first experience with law enforcement was having, you know who? Working class and poor white folks on horseback going around keeping black folks in line on behalf of the rich master that owned all the property. That sounds a lot like modern policing because ain't no rich people policing, right? It's working class folks who are out there protecting the property of rich people against the depredations of poor people. That's what modern policing is, and it traces back. And we know that's what modern policing is, by the way, because we will lock you up for 10 years for $100 worth of food stamp fraud. But if you take $12.5 trillion on Wall Street, 20% of the net worth of this country, you will not do 1 day in jail. So we know that law enforcement has got nothing to do with enforcing the law. It's got nothing to do with good people and bad people, lawbreakers and the law abiding. It only has to do with controlling certain people. And black and brown folks know who those certain people usually are because it's always been them. See, black folks know that it was cops who were involved in race riots and racial terrorism against black communities for the first 50 years of the 20th century. You didn't learn about that in class either, and that's not your fault. It wasn't taught. But in fact, every single year, just about from 1900 all the way to the 1930s, 1940s at least, there were race riots where white folks would just go into black communities, burn them to the ground, bomb them from the air like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, rip people out of their homes, beat them in the street, and police sat by, watched it happen, and participated. That doesn't mean that every cop in the modern era is like that, but it means that black folks can be excused for being not so clear on the decency of police in their communities because there's a history there. It was police who dragged black folks and white allies off of those sit-in stools at lunch counters in the South to enforce segregation. See, when your job is to enforce the law, and for most of American history the law was against you as a people, then enforcing the law means you are the first line of oppression. People of color know that history and need to be excused when they don't just get over it because that continues. How do we know it continues? Very easy. We know from the data on racial profiling that black folks are twice as likely as white folks to be stopped and searched for drugs, even though white folks are more likely to have drugs on us on the occasions that we're searched. White folks use drugs and sell drugs at the same or higher rate than black folks and Latinos, and yet it is black folks and Latinos who in any given year make up 85 to 90% of the people who get arrested and incarcerated for a drug offense. See, people of color know that. And if we don't understand when black folks rise up and say Black Lives Matter. Well, what do you mean, black? All lives matter. Yes, sweetheart, I know they do. Yes, they do. And that is a totally irrelevant and unnecessary point to make. You see, you don't have to say all lives matter. We take that for granted. What we've never accepted in this country is that black and brown life matter. You have to proclaim that which is ignored, you see. That's why we have Black History Month right now and not White History Month. We don't have to have the White History Month because we got May and June and July and August. And every other month where we learn about white folks, we don't have to call it that. See how slick that is? That's how white supremacy operates. You don't have to call it White History Month. You just call it history, and literature, and theater, and poetry, and art. You don't have to racialize where it came from, right? That's what Malefi Asante at Temple calls universalizing the particular, which is the hallmark of Eurocentric thought, right? Not everybody's experience is the same. And so when certain people have been left out of all, you have to call that out by name. Because see, we've always said all, then we didn't mean it. We said all men are created equal, and we didn't mean that shit, right? We didn't mean women, but we didn't even mean all men. We said all, and it was a lie when we said it, right? And so in a sense, when you say Black Lives Matter, to respond with all lives matter would be like going in a time machine back to 1971. Y'all won't remember this, those who were students, those who were older will. Around 1970, 71, 72, the big phrase was black is beautiful, right? There was this desire to take back the beauty narrative from a beauty industry, fashion industry, glamour industry that had hijacked it and denigrated black physicality and beauty, right? So folks were saying black is beautiful to reclaim a sense of beauty for themselves. It'd be like getting in a time machine, going back to 1971, hearing somebody say black is beautiful and tapping them on the shoulder and going, but we're all beautiful in our own way. Yeah, shut up, we know. Not the point. It'd be like going back to the early 80s when the HIV/AIDS crisis started. And it took several years for the President of the United States to even utter the word. Ronald Reagan didn't want to even utter the word, let alone cut loose with funding to deal with the problem until his buddy Rock Hudson died of it. And then all of a sudden, he was willing to talk about it a little bit, right? So for the first several years, what'd you have? You had activists out in the street. You had ACT UP, Gay Men's Health Crisis, out in the street demanding research and funding for HIV/AIDS, right? And what they were saying, in effect, was people with AIDS lives matter. That wasn't the actual phrase, and we didn't have hashtags, but that was essentially what they were saying, right? People with AIDS lives matter, and we need to pay attention because right now we're not paying attention to that. And we don't seem to believe it as a society, so we need to start believing it. It would be like getting in a time machine, going back to 1983, 82, in the middle of an ACT UP event or a Gay Men's Health Crisis event and shutting down the protest by saying, yeah, but what about pancreatic cancer? People die of all kinds of things, right? Sort of not the point. You have to proclaim that which is ignored. And if we know the history, we understand that, right? Because if we know the history, we know that it is indeed black life, and I would suggest brown life, life of color generally, indigenous life, that is usually denigrated, demeaned, ignored. On a sexual level, it's trans lives that are demeaned, ignored, right? It's women as women. So sometimes you got to proclaim that which is not in the obvious frame of reference. There's nothing pernicious about it. It's not about saying black lives are worth more than other lives. It's about, damn it, these lives actually do matter. And even though the history says they don't, we're here to tell you that they do. And there's nothing wrong about that at all. But if you don't know the history, it might seem untoward. And I get it. And again, it's not your fault that you don't know the history, but it is our responsibility to learn it and then apply it to what we see. Same is true with immigration. This immigration drama that we have right now is only possible because we don't understand our own history. As a country, and particularly those of us of European descent, we have lied to ourselves about how we got here and for what reason. See, black folks know why they're here. Native peoples know why they're here and how they got here. A lot of Asian folk know, particularly if they're Chinese American, they know they got here because their ancestors were brought over to work on the railroads by the railroad barons who didn't care if thousands of them died laying track 19, 20 hours a day. But for those of us who are from Europe, we have this fiction that we've told, and we believe it, even though there's no truth to it. You know what the fiction is? It's two parts. Number one, we say things like, with regard to Mexicans coming over the border, with regard to immigrants coming up, but only that border. That's the only one we care about, right? The southern border. I find that interesting. We're not flipping out about Canada, right? We don't have any of the Minutemen or the anti-immigrant groups sitting off the coast of Nova Scotia with a gun and a scope trying to like pick off the sneaky Canadians that are trying to sneak in here for our superior healthcare system, which after all would be a pretty stupid thing to do. But in any event, we only care about that one border, forgetting for a minute that that border was created at the end of a war that was started on false pretense by this country, after which we jacked half of their country. And you weren't taught that in school either because our history books aren't interested in telling the truth. They tell this very patriotic history that has no relationship to the fact. So that border is artificial. Mexican folk who are coming here, documented or not, let's be clear, are coming home. Their families were here before our families were here in almost every instance. But we forget that, and then we say things like, well, I don't mind them coming. I just want them to come legally like my people did. The hell does that even mean? Come legally? There was no law to break when our people came. The fact that we didn't break a law that didn't even exist, you don't get cookies for that. You don't get like a pat on the back and a gold star because your great, great, great whatever was law-abiding when there was no law that he could have violated, even if he wanted to. But we've told this lie that we came for these upstanding principles. So we'll say things like, well, you know, our people came for liberty and freedom, democracy. These people are just coming for stuff. They're just coming for jobs. They're just coming for health care. They're just coming for stuff. We came for high-minded principle, right? Because we believe that. What kind of third-grade version of American history is that? Right? Like when Donald Trump says, well, Mexico's not sending their best. What the hell, you think Europe sent their best? Europe, no, our people were the losers of Europe. I'm not trying to be an asshole, I'm just telling you the truth. Like, our people were the losers of Europe. The winners didn't get on the boat. You understand what I'm saying? The winners didn't leave. Why the hell would you leave if you were winning? Only the losers left because they had no choice. They were dying, they were starving, they couldn't support their families. A lot of them were convicts who were sold into indentured servitude to work for rich European people. They were barely above the level of a slave themselves. The idea that we had these we didn't believe in liberty and freedom. And we know that because once we got to the colonies, we set up the opposite of liberty and freedom. And I don't just mean that for like black folks and native folks. I mean even for other white folks. Like we spent most of the time in the early colonies trying to figure out who the witch was, right? It was like, well, you're not a Christian. Well, no, you're not a Christian. Well, no, you're not a Christian. I'm going to hang you from a tree. Really? Well, I'm going to drown you in the stream. Well, I'm going to set you on fire. Like, that wasn't liberty. The colonies were some of the least free places in the history of the cosmos. But we act like we came for liberty, and they're just here to take advantage. Let's be clear. Our people didn't come for liberty. They came for stuff. They came for stuff like land. They came for stuff like opportunity. They came for stuff like the ability to feed their families, and there's no shame in that. None at all. But just like there's no shame in our families having done that, there's no shame in brown families doing that and coming over that border from Mexico, Central America, or wherever else they might be coming. There's no shame in any event, but we've told a lie. It's like we have this image in our head that sometime in like 1650, this was a common scene in England. All the nice white noblemen got together, and one of them gathered his children around the fireplace in the middle of the 1600s and said, "Well, now, children, I think you'll agree with me that we're doing quite brilliant here, and we have this big mansion, and we have all this gold, and you remember last week when the king invited us to the palace, and you played out in the garden with his children. I know, it was brilliant, right? It was great, it was great, it was great. I bet it was lots of fun, but Daddy thinks that we need to stop all that nonsense and maybe strike out on an adventure, so here's my plan. Even though we're doing so well, even though we pretty much run the show here in England, I think that what we should do this summer, follow me, stick with me, I know it's going to be a stretch, but I promise it's going to be great, is we should get on a big boat. A rickety old ship. I don't even know if it's seaworthy, children. It might sink. We might be eaten by sharks. We might get hijacked by pirates. We might get scurvy and die a horrible death. However, I think you will agree it will be an adventure, a great one indeed. That did not happen. Noblemen didn't leave. Those who were doing well did not leave. Only the losers got on the boat. People say things like, well, my family came over on the Mayflower. Okay, sweetheart, you might not want to talk about that. If you actually knew who was on those early ships, I'm not sure who was, but I know who wasn't. The king. The king was not on that ship. Nobody the king really wanted to keep around was on that ship, right? So our inability to see this, though, understand the importance historically. If we don't understand that we came for the same reasons that folks come today, be they documented or not, then we can't see them in us, and we can't see us in them. And that's why we have this drama, because we're spending all this time pretending that our motivations and our even human decency and ethics are different when they're not, you see. This is why history matters so much. We can't fix any of these problems, whether it's immigration issues, whether it's criminal justice issues, whether it's wealth disparity, all of that. We can't do anything about that if we're not willing to understand history. But let me close with this. And it's a point that I think needs to be made, because sometimes when we talk about racism and we talk about the heavy weight of history, sometimes people assume that there is an attempt on my part or other anti-racist activists or educators' part to instill guilt in white people. I have no interest in white guilt, none. And people of color surely have no interest in white guilt. Guilt will not liberate anybody from anything. It will not liberate any of us from systems of inequality. It isn't about feeling guilty. It's not even about white people per se. It's about whiteness as a system, right? Sometimes people get tripped up on that, right? And they think like, oh, you hate white people. Actually, let me be clear, I love me some white people. I totally, absolutely love me some white people. Like my wife is white, I totally love her. Those daughters that I've been telling you about, they're white, because that's what happens when white people make babies. I love them. My mom, love her, nice white lady. And my dad and I don't get along, but it's not because he's white, it's about some other shit that we don't have time to process tonight. But if you read my book, White Like Me, you'll know what some of that is. We don't have to talk about that. It's not about white people. It's about whiteness. It's about a system of white supremacy that has turned us against one another, right? And so I want to tell you a story that tries to explain the difference between guilt and responsibility, so you'll know what I mean when I say those things are different, because it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to really understand why. So let me just share a brief story with you, and then I'll take questions, and I'll let you out of here, and I'll be happy to sell you some books if you want one, because I got a college fund to pay for. So, feel free to come buy some merchandise. But anyway, the story is not about racism, so that part of the speech is over, right? It's not about oppression. It's not about privilege. It's not about inequality. It's about something totally different. But I think the story has a lesson in it about those subjects. So it has to do with something that happened to me when I got out of college. I graduated 26 years ago this May from Tulane University in New Orleans. And when I graduated, for some reason, I'm still not totally clear on this, I thought it would be a really great idea to move into a very large house with 9 other people. Let me just give you a little life advice, all right? Like if you haven't already figured this out, okay? Do not think for 1 minute that it is ever a good idea to move into a very large house with 9 other people. It usually is not nearly as fun as you think it is going to be. It has all kinds of problems, but we didn't think about any of those. We thought it was going to be great. Why? Because it was going to be cheap. And we needed that because we were broke, right? We were right out of college. We didn't have any money. Rent was $525 a month. I don't mean per person, I mean total, right? So again, not good at math, but I can do those numbers. $52.50 per person per month, man. You add the cable bill, the utility bills, we split the food, right? It's still less than $100 a month. So like on that level, this was a great idea, right? This was brilliant, right? $100 a month, man. Even in $1990, that was good, right? It'd be ridiculous today, but it would be good even by 1990 standards. So on a financial level, it made sense. But about 6 weeks into this little experiment in communal living, we came to understand, or at least I did, why it had been a terrible mistake. And this is what happened. I was working downtown and I was living uptown. So I get on the streetcar to come back uptown in New Orleans. I get off the streetcar, I walk, 5 blocks or so into the house on Robert Street. I go up the steps at 1805 Robert. I open the door and I'm met by this incredible smell. And I mean that in a good way, which is important to point out because when you live with 9 other people, there's all kinds of smells. They're usually not good. This one was actually really nice. It was the smell of dinner being cooked for the whole group because we also took turns making dinner for each other. And this particular night, one of my roommates was making dinner. On the left front burner of the stove, there was this big pot of gumbo, right? And man, that's what you do in New Orleans. Big pot of gumbo, and it smelled good, and it looked good, and it even had shrimp in there. Not many, like I said, we were broke, but it had like 3, right? 3 of those really little bitty ass shrimp. Those shrimp that are like so small, right, that they make jumbo shrimp look like lobsters or something, right? And so I looked at it, and I smelled it, and I thought, man, that looks great. And when my roommate asked me if I wanted any, I normally would have said yes, but as it turned out, I didn't know he was going to make gumbo for the night, and so I'd already had dinner downtown before I, came uptown after I got off work. So I said, hey man, I already ate, but do me a favor, smells great, looks great, take me some of that, put it in a container, put it in the fridge, I'm gonna take it to work tomorrow for lunch. And he said, okay, great. And so he does that, and then I go upstairs and, listen to music, watch TV, hung out with some friends or whatever, and did whatever we did for fun in 1990. There wasn't much. Like social networking in 1990 was pretty much you just walk down the hall to your roommate's room and you're like, hey, what you doing? And they were like, nothing, it's 1990, there's nothing to do, go back to sleep. Get with us in like 15 years and there'll be something maybe, or 20 years, right? So we all sort of go to bed early. I went to bed sort of early, woke up the next morning at like 7:30, came downstairs to get some coffee, get ready to go to work, and I noticed that on the left front burner of our stove was still the same pot of gumbo. And man, it did not smell as good or look as good as it had the night before. And my roommate had neither saved any of it for me, nor had he cleaned it. So I was pissed on 2 levels, right? Now the food had gone to waste. I definitely wasn't going to eat it now. But he also left the mess for me or, maybe one of the other roommates to clean. So I sat there and I thought about what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to wake him up, right? Get him to clean it, give him hell for it. But then I thought, no, I'm going to be nice. I'm just going to clean it. I'll take it up with him when I get home. So I took the pot of gumbo and I brought it over to the sink and I got the brush and the soap and I started running the water into the pot of nasty day-old gumbo, and I stopped myself halfway through. And I said, man, I don't have to clean this. This isn't my mess. I didn't even eat any of this, let alone did I make it. So now I'm feeling really self-righteous because I'm talking myself out of doing the hard work, right? So now I feel real smart. So I take the pot of gumbo and I put it right back where I found it on the left front burner, right? And I walk out the door, head held high, knowing that I had not been suckered into cleaning somebody else's mess, right? So then I come back that night at about 6:15, 6:30, and I see one of my other roommates making dinner on the right front burner of the stove. But on the left front burner, right where it had been now for 24 hours, is the same pot of gumbo getting nastier, more disgusting, more crusted on the sides of the pot. I looked at my roommate, I'm like, man, what are you doing? Like, I know you can smell dinner from last night. How the hell can you make dinner for us now on the right front burner when it's right under your nose? Why don't you clean that? And he looked at me and said, hey man, I didn't make the gumbo. I didn't even eat any of the gumbo. I wasn't even here last night. How about you? I said, hey man, not me. And now we both felt self-righteous and we knew what it meant. He looked at me and said, so, you want some lentils and rice? And I said, absolutely. So I piled up my plate with lentils and rice. I ate my dinner. I wiped off the dish in the sink, cleaned it, dried it, put it in the dish rack, went upstairs, hung out with the roommates, did whatever we do for fun in 1990. Once again, went to bed sort of early. Woke up the next morning. I'd forgotten to set an alarm. Wake up about 7. But here's a tip. If you're living in a house where a pot of gumbo has been sitting on the left front burner of the stove for what is now 36 and a half hours, you are not going to need an alarm clock to wake your ass up. You are going to be awake, right? Because the smell is going to find you. It is going to crawl out of the pot of gumbo on the legs that it grew overnight. And I'm not speaking in metaphor, English majors. I mean that shit literally. Like the stink is going to grow feet and legs, and it is going to crawl out of the pot, across the kitchen, across the living room, up the stairs, down the back hall, go under your door frame, and it is going to find with the precision of a laser that thing on the front of your face you call the nose, and you will be awake. And now and I was pissed because I knew what the smell meant, right? I knew what was waiting for me on the left front burner, having not been cleaned by anybody, least of all the guy that made the gumbo. So I open my door real loud. I start stomping down the hall, hoping to wake people up, hoping to let them know just how displeased I am. Live with 9 other people, cannot find one of them. And the guy that made the gumbo's like, where's Waldo? Nobody knows where in the hell he went. He just made the gumbo like a practical joke and disappeared, right? Just wanted to see how long it would take for somebody else to clean up his mess, I guess. And I get down to the bottom of the stairs. I look across the living room into the kitchen. I see the pot of gumbo, and I'm pretty confident the gumbo saw me, right? With the eyes that it had also grown. It was evolving right there in our kitchen very rapidly, yes? And it was at that moment, not one moment earlier, but definitely not a moment later, that I came to understand maybe the most important lesson I'd ever learned about any subject. And what was it? The lesson was it didn't really matter anymore who made the mess. Didn't really matter anymore who was the author of all this unpleasantness, as the old saying goes. The only thing that mattered was that I was tired of living in that nastiness. I was tired of living with the residue of somebody else's actions. I was not to blame, but I had to take responsibility, because if I didn't, it may not get clean. You see, and the same is true with human society. When we decide that we will clean up the residue of what other folks left us, even though they did it without our permission and without our involvement, when we decide that we're tired of living in that, we will clean it. Not because we are to blame, not because we are guilty, but because we're the only damn ones left. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
All right, so that is what we have from that video, and an immensely educative video. And I hope you have learned a lot, picked a lot from this video. This is Tim Wise. Tim Wise is a lawyer and an activist for racial equality, and just fight for the same. A few things we have picked from what he says right there, and a few of them is that we're all social beings. We're essentially or genetically uh, social beings. We need one another. So this whole concept, this whole fight of black versus white versus black, trying to to draw the rift in between us, is not very sustainable, because we actually need one another. Um, you know, looking at the creation of animals and different animal species, there are animals that are created to be social, and others are loners, majority of their lifetimes. But as for human beings, we could clearly say we are social beings. And there is this theory, is it a theory called the porcupine theory? And porcupine is a small animal with sharp spikes all over its body for protection. And looking at the social nature of human beings, sometimes we refer to this theory, the porcupine theory. We prick each other with our bad behaviors, with our shortcomings, with our weaknesses. But then again, above and beyond our shortcomings, we need each other. We still always need to get back to cuddle together. We cannot survive for so long in the cold on our own. Each porcupine will always try to move close to the other. And by doing this, they sometimes end up pricking one another with the sharp spikes, and they repel each other. But after some time in the cold, there is an obvious need to get back together to warm up. Okay, again, Tim Wise says this, brings it so clear that black people have actually built this world. Um, and look at the places where the black people get the most suppression and oppression. Europe and America, for instance. Try to think of the United States of America minus the input of black people. There would not be an America as it is today, most definitely. Look at a country like France, the UK, Germany, Belgium, just entirely the whole of Europe. Look at Europe and remove the input of black people. And when I say the input of black people, remove both the natural resources gotten from the lands of black people and the human resources from of the black people. There would not be an existing advanced, technologically advanced Europe as it is today. It is through the sweat, the hard work, the resilience, the tears, and the blood of black people that this world has thrived, that has been built on, literally. Again, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, black people getting oppressed, that black people need to have equal opportunities, equal chances, equal institutional advantages and privileges. Team Y says clearly here that we need to proclaim that which is ignored. When we say Black Lives Matter, it does not really mean that white lives don't matter, or yellow lives don't matter, or red, or whichever color you want to say that doesn't matter. What we're trying to say here, in short, is all lives matter, but this life, black life, which is ignored, need to be elevated, need to be given equal status to that other, because it is also alive like others. Um, we need to challenge history, especially this white, imperialistic, patronizing history of trying to paint blackness and black people and just bring about the concept of white supremacy, telling and using that to tell stories of black people, because black people should be able to tell their own stories from their own perspective. We need to revisit history. We need to challenge, rewrite the whole of history. Tell the world about the input of black people in this world. Tell them about black inventors, black inventions that have shaped this world today. Let's just not talk about Isaac Newton and Henry Ford, but let's also talk about black inventions and black inventors, and let's tell the world that there are so many black inventions that were stolen. I say stolen from the black people, from their owners, the black inventors, and were assumed or taken over by either rich white people, rich white families, uh, companies of white people, and they advanced the inventions, and they have made millions and millions, if not billions of dollars, in generational wealth for white families at the expense of black families that were actually supposed to benefit from the very first place. We need to tell this story because our children, black people, and the children of white people need to know, especially this point goes to black people and black kids. Black kids need to know these inventions, inventors, input in science and technology and in literature and everywhere, so the white kids know what they are capable of. Again, let's tell about what was stolen from black people that went out there to benefit white people, to accrue wealth, generational wealth for white families. So white kids will grow up and they will be able to tell where their families actually got that wealth from. And I know that will be a bit like shameful or something, but that is exactly what need to be done. White people, especially in Europe, been lately complaining of how black people are coming, invading their lands to take over opportunities, to take over their jobs. And Tim Wise clearly is saying here that white people that complain are white supremacists, lazy white supremacists, who, instead of getting up, waking up, leaving their comfort zones to go and take the jobs in their own lands, resort to complaining. How do people that come from miles, thousands of miles away, come to challenge you to take the jobs while you have been staying and watching? It means you didn't have the urge, um, uh, you didn't have, you were not able to do the job rather. So you are just being lazy. Get up, take the jobs, and then the surplus can be given to the foreigners after you. But you can't just stay there and start complaining. After all, if we were to start complaining of who invaded who first, then I think we black people are in a better position, are more justified, because for us, we were invaded, our resources were taken, our natural resources were stolen, were embezzled, and even our human resource, even our people were stolen, were killed, unalived, and all sorts of atrocities and inhumane, actions. Um, Something else that we need to take into consideration here is this is not to pit white people against black people or black people against white people. It's not a fight. It is a challenge of history, a patronizing history. It is to challenge the whole concept of whiteness, or in other words, white supremacy, and to tell the truth and to say that all of us are equal, deserve equal treatment, equal opportunities, and equal chances. Very, very informing, very, very deeply educative video right there. I hope you enjoyed, and not just enjoyed, but you learned, you empowered yourself with this kind of knowledge. I'd really welcome your